In this week's Fixture Friday, I'm going to go over my top 10 tips for using the Rotovise Pro. Let's get started.
I was made for this. I was made for this.
Let's jump right into it. Tip number 1, don't over-tighten it. Now, the Rotovise Pro has a torque limit of 45 foot-pounds, but what you need to know is that we limited this torque to protect the rotary unit itself. You don't want excessive amounts of torque transferred to the rotary unit, which could wear out or damage the brake or worm gear over time. Now, another thing to know is that the thread pitch on the Rotovise shaft has a fine pitch of 16 threads per inch. Now, a typical 6-inch vise has a 10-pitch thread. Check out the clamping forces using the same torque in these two examples. This means you get 60% more clamping force out of the same torque. Now, there's a reason why we include a relatively short-handled speed handle with the Rotovise. 2 hands on these 5-inch long handles can actually put a lot of clamping force into the workpiece. Less torque, same clamping force. Number 2, use the right amount of torque. Now, just because you can go to 45 foot-pounds doesn't mean you should. A lot of times, excessive clamping force will bow or damage your workpiece. Worse yet, there's a chance that over-tightening while holding a narrow part in the serrated jaws will exceed the yield strength of the hardened jaws and may crack or deform them. Now, our guidelines for clamping parts in the serrated jaw stations is 20 to 25 foot-pounds for aluminum and around 35 foot-pounds in steels. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are when you're clamping with the full width of the serrated vise jaws. You should definitely reduce this if your part is smaller, since the same force will be focused on a smaller area. Now, if you're using Rotovise pallets, you should not exceed 15 foot-pounds of clamping force. There's no advantage and only downsides if you exceed this torque. Number 3, speaking of pallets, mark your pallets. Now, if you look at the bottom side, there are 4 boxes that you can mark to match the station in which that fixture was cut in. Any experienced machinist knows that whether it's soft jaws in a vise or jaws in a 3-jaw lathe chuck, mixing jaws between different faces will lead to a lack of repeatability. Same thing goes for our pallets. Cut them in a station and use them in that same station. Number 4, you might not actually need to indicate the Rotovise. If you're planning on using your Rotovise for first stop work, it's actually not important that it spins perfectly on center. But what is extremely important is that your control has the true center of rotation in the offsets. Now, I know it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around this, but if you're cutting first off parts out of bar stock, the stock has so much variation to begin with that the part's going to be cut where the part gets cut regardless of the micro variations of the stock. Now, knowing that the true center of rotation is in the control, this will ensure that parts cut on the top will be in the right spot when rotated over to be cut on the sides. Number 5, patterns in CAM are your best friend. Now, at first glance, one of the intimidating factors about 4th axis programming is that you literally have 4 times the number of parts. But simply programming one part and then patterning 4 times around greatly simplifies things. Now, one thing you don't want to overlook when posting is that you want to pattern all tool paths for the top operation first. Then, if there are side operations, program and post those next in your program. For example, let's say that you have a drill that is used on the top and then again on the side of the part, but there's also material removed using an end mill during the top operation. Now, if you drill all the holes first, you may risk crashing into the material on the side of the part that should have been removed with an end mill during the top operation. Again, it's safer to do all of the top operations first and then the side ops and pattern those as well. Number 6, if patterns are your best friend, mirror images are going to be a pretty good buddy. Now, by this, I mean it's still technically a pattern, but if you're doing first and second op work in different stations, pattern your first op parts 180 degrees apart and then swap them into the second op stations that are 90 degrees off of the first op ones. Now, we demonstrated this in Fixture Friday 21, where we machined both operations of 6-sided dice in one setup. The symmetry of operations 90 degrees apart are a lot safer to work with. Number 7, clearance is king. Now, in machining, there's a saying that clearance is clearance, which can mean if you have 1,000th of clearance, it's still clearance. But with the Rotovise, it's really important to not overlook your clearance because a lot of cam systems don't properly model the clearance of the spindle and the body of the rotary, or any cables or any other attachments that might be coming out of the top, including airlines that are on the side of the spindle. Now, the one clearance to be conscious of is to establish a clearance plane for all tools that are at least 2 inches above the top of your part and something closer to 6 inches if you're programming off the side of the part. This makes sure your tool is safely clear when the rotary unit goes to rotate. Number 8, you can attach your Rotovise to a bunch of different things. Yes, our Rotovise has a bolt hole pattern for both 4 and 6 T-slot rotary platters, but it also has 96mm bores that you can install pull studs in for use in existing 96mm workholding products. Now, another option is that we make custom adapters all the time for a bunch of different brands and applications, such as 5-axis tables, horizontal tables, and rotary units that have A2 nose pieces that are usually seen on lathes. Reach out to us and we'll be sure to set you up right. Number 9, get set up in the right spot. Now, one of our hot products we sell is called the Smart Plate, which allows you to move your rotary unit not just higher, but outside of the work envelope of your machine. This maximizes swing clearance for taller parts and also frees up space on the rest of the machine table so that you don't have to waste time moving your rotary unit in and out of the machine. I'll add a link to that product in the description below. And finally, number 10, minimize tool changes. Now, one of the great advantages about the Rotovise is that if it's programmed right, instead of changing a tool for each part, you change a tool after every 360-degree rotation of parts. For example, on op 1 of our demo dice parts, we faced all 4 parts, then changed tools and grab an end mill. Then we machined the sides of all 4 parts, change tools again and grab a drill, and so on. So by minimizing tool changes, you'll cut the waste associated with tool change time by 75%. Now, don't go too crazy. If there's a tool that you're using on the top and then later on the sides of the part, it's best to change back to that tool after all of the top operations have been completed. Okay, of course, I'm gonna give you a bonus tip. When you're changing parts, you don't need to rotate it 4 times. Only rotate it twice. Change the top and the front facing part, and then rotate it 180 degrees and do the same top and front part change. Now, it's actually pretty simple. Just add these 2 lines of code right above your M30. So that's it. If you have any more questions, drop them in the comments section below. I'll be sure to answer them. And until next time, go innovate your production.